Hello there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Showdown Slate at DraftKings for Friday, May 24th. Yeah, Showdown Slates have been a bit volatile lately, with weird people like Drew Holiday and Jaden McDaniels wrecking to the point where they are in the captain, and that is how we win. Feels terrible, but here we are. That's the reality we live in. Showdown Slates are a little bit unpredictable. Truly, you can use just about anybody you want to, but I continue to live and die on that hill where, I don't want to captain Jaden McDaniels and Drew Holiday to win. Again, you can do that, but I'm just going to go over the captain plays that I think are truly the best, and then also the values that I like overall. So obviously this game is headed into, or the series is headed into game 2. Dallas stole the first game in dramatic fashion. This game has a 207 total, and the Timberwolves are at home and 5.5 point favorites. So usually when you go down 2 games to none in playoff series, that's about it. That's all she wrote. So I would imagine Minnesota as being the better regular season team, being the team that had the advantage in the regular season series, and being at home and being the superior defensive squad. I would imagine that they show up and win this game. Obviously, it's the playoffs, it's NBA, anything can happen. But that is where I'm headed right away. I'm tilting towards the Timberwolves. It doesn't mean you can't use Luka and other Mavs, obviously. I don't think it's like at the NFL where you want to have to necessarily force a dramatic 4x1, build. But I would probably be leaning towards a Minnesota player in my captain slot because of that right away. Flawed logic aside, just because you never know what's going to happen. Let's look at each team's and first look at the Mavs side. So obviously Luka looks amazing. He comes in with the best overall projection of the slate. Let's see how far away is Anthony Edwards on him. 8 points behind him. So obviously Luka stands to be the chalkiest captain play and the chalkiest overall play. He is the chalkiest overall play right now at 60% ownership. I have no problem with that. And I definitely see merit in rostering Luka a ton. Because of his price, though, I do not think he's an absolute must. Based on price, based off of who he's been in the playoffs, he has not even hit 70 fantasy points in any game in the playoffs. Not to say he can't. Obviously, that massive Luka blow-up game is right around the corner, and it's going to come when we least expect it. So nothing wrong with playing Luka. I do not think you absolutely need to play him, and I definitely won't be playing him in captain a lot. He's certainly playable in captain, just in the off chance he's not as owned as he maybe should be. But I just like the idea of fading that mega chalk guy in the captain slot. I just start right away by moving him over to utility, being very underweight on captain and maybe a little bit underweight in general, so I have a more balanced build. Just because if Luka only gets 55 to 60 fantasy points, I don't think he's necessarily going to break the Showdown slate. I think you can get by without that, just because there's a lot of guys who can kind of approach that projection, like Kyrie, and you got Edwards and Rudy and Cat. So if that happens and then you hit the right values, I think you can survive Luka. That said, I'm probably going to have a ton of Luka, and I'll just be sliding him over to my utility spot so he's not soaking up all that cash from the captain spot. Moving on, last time I really liked Kyrie Irving as a captain play and a general contrarian play. He was very low owned in captain, and right now he's coming in at 31% ownership overall. So I again like Kyrie. His price has come down. He was a really interesting play going into yesterday's 2-game slate, and again to the next 2-game slate, which, by the way, will not be breaking down. Just very busy today, so just doing this video, and if we can cram in a MLB or UFL video later, that'd be amazing. But right now we're just going to do the Showdown slate. And as things stand for this specific slate, Kyrie again looks good for the captain. If we can assume that he's going to be low owned, you could definitely entertain him there. If I'm fading Luka, I really, really like him at utility. But yeah, he looks like a good play, but not an absolute must. PJ Washington is very interesting to me just because we know he's going to get minutes. He has been, getting 35 to 40 minutes in competitive games. He's exhibited a ceiling when he's filling up as a scorer, and he's not really carrying a lot of ownership. 16% overall right now. That's very interesting to me when he's going to be priced at where is he priced at? He is 8 K. So that's kind of like no man's land, just because he's a little bit cheaper than, Rudy Gobert and Cat and Kyrie Irving's above him, and then he's like below him is like Mike Conley and Jaden McDaniels, two guys that people might want to get to. So because of his price point, I think he's going to be low owned. So he's a pretty interesting contrarian utility play. And if we can get his ceiling, which a few games ago he displayed at 58 fantasy points and then a couple other 40-point fantasy outings, he looks like a pretty interesting captain play. So even though I'm leaning towards Minnesota just because I think they're going to win this game, I don't think you have to play a Minnesota guy in the captain. And if you're going to try to get different with a guy that does display a ceiling, it will be very low owned. PJ Washington looks like a really good option. That's probably where I'm going to stop with the Mavs as far as captain plays. Again, it's Showdown. Freaking Jaden McDaniels and Drew Holiday have been captain gods lately, so you can absolutely do whatever you want. And if you wanted to go further, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, Derek Jones, they're all like viable if you're rolling out like 150 lineups, if you're maxing a contest or something. But I just don't think that's what I want to do. That said, they look like really good values for utility. Derek Lively is probably the best one. That ownership at 0% is not correct. That DFS Zero has at the moment. So honestly, it's early. So ownership in general is going to kind of update and feel a little bit more correct as the day goes on. Just kind of loose indicators as far as where we could be looking. Of that trio, Derek Jones Jr. probably will be the lowest owned though, just because he has the lowest ceiling and he's not a good per minute guy compared to those two guys. But he is going to play like 35 minutes in a close game. So if we know he's cheaper, he's the cheapest of the three. He's cheaper. He's going to get a lot of minutes, and he has been playing well. He came back down to earth a little bit last time with 16 fantasy points, but before that, he had 27 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. So the minutes are there. The production has been there. I do like him as a lower owned value, but all three of those guys look really good. As far as reliability and floor and ceiling, Lively is probably the best play of those three. But he's also probably going to end up being the highest owned. So if you want to play the ownership game, Derek Jones Jr. and Daniel Gafford are definitely worthwhile pivots. As far as true punts, you do have to entertain them because it's a showdown slate. If you want to cram in Luka and Anthony Edwards and all these other dudes, and more specifically, if you want to cram in Luka or Edwards in the captain slot, you're going to have to entertain just really ugly plays like Josh Green, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Jaden Hardy. So the good news is Jaden Hardy is still really, really cheap at 2.2K. He's been playing a little bit, 9+ minutes in each of the last 3 games. He's at 8+ fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. That doesn't feel great. On a 2-game slate, you might shy away from that. But on a showdown slate, if you can get in there for 10 minutes and pop off a little bit as a scorer, Jaden Hardy could absolutely help you win. So he is in play. I don't think he's like a total must for me. But I do like the fact that he's not carrying a lot of ownership at the moment. If we update later and he's like 50% owned or something because he's so cheap and helps everybody get those big name stars, I might deviate a little bit for sure. Tim Hardaway Jr. is the first one of this trio that I would get away from. Absolutely, he's a veteran. He has proven to be an explosive scorer before. It is entirely possible he comes in and hits like 5 shots in a row and they just say, well, I guess we're playing THG the rest of the game. Because you're not going to set the guy in the playoffs if he's hitting every shot. Problem is that it's not been happening. He's not really the best per minute guy because if he's not scoring, he's not doing much out there. I mean, literally in his last 3 games, he has 7 fantasy points or fewer. Last game, he played 10 minutes and took 0 shots. Like, what is that all about? I don't know. So I don't think Tim Hardaway Jr. is out of play, but I don't think he's a guy we can trust either. So I would definitely rank him 3rd when it comes to Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, and Tim Hardaway Jr. So, which cue the massive Tim Hardaway Jr. game, by the way, because that's always how it goes. And then who Josh Green, he's not exactly an elite per minute guy either. He's not really been crushing, but he's had 13+ minutes in like every game in the playoffs, basically, except for 1. So he has a role off the bench. He can push for 15, maybe even 20 minutes if he's playing well. 11+ fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. So he's an okay value. I think because of price, I'd probably go Hardy first, then Josh Green, and then THJ. Do we feel amazing about any of those guys? No. But if we want to stack in all those studs, I think one of those guys is going to be worth looking at. Over to the Minnesota side we go. Obviously, I favor the Timberwolves, so I will be personally looking to funnel in viable Timberwolves guys into that captain slot. You better believe I'm going to throw in Jaden McDaniels a couple times just because apparently he cannot miss a shot ever. Truly, Jaden McDaniels is shooting like 70%. He shot 60% last game, 70% the game before, 80% the game before. Could he finally be trending downward? Gosh, I hope so. He has scored 21 real points in 3 straight games. This is not the Jaden McDaniels I know. I've preached all playoffs that the guy plays a ton. And if he can avoid foul trouble, he's viable just because minutes are currency in DFS. But it doesn't really translate to much when you're not a high usage guy and you're not scoring a bunch. But here he is, 10 plus shot attempts in 3 straight games. He's hitting a ton of threes. He's even getting rebounds and steals and stuff. So absolutely at 6K, Jaden McDaniels remains in play. He does remain in play as a captain because if he's going to keep crushing like this, yes, you can play him in captain. I don't really want to sway you on Jaden McDaniels. I think we're getting to the point where he's at a price where we can fade him even more comfortably than before, just because I don't think this is sustainable. But I've been saying it for like 3 straight games for him, and it hasn't stopped. So do what you will with Jaden McDaniels. Just know that I don't really believe in what's happening with him, and I think it's going to come to an end soon. And this is even more so the case for me if he's going to be chalky. Right now, he's coming at 45% ownership. If he's going to be 45% owned, I'm going to do something else. I just am. And I'm going to hope Jaden McDaniels hits like nothing. He goes 0 for 10, and it turns back into the pumpkin that he is. So that's how I feel about McDaniels. Naz Reid's coming in really, really chalky at 60%. I feel like that is good chalk just because he's really cheap. He's a way better per minute guy historically than Jaden McDaniels. So that is chalk I'm interested in. Kyle Anderson also looks like good chalk just because Nickeil Alexander-Walker appears to be losing minutes to him. Nickeil has played like 16 plus minutes in 3 straight games after having a much bigger role. He can't hit any shots right now. Nickeil is still in play as a punch just because he is out there for 16 minutes. You just never know. He could get hot. I just feel like Kyle Anderson is a little bit safer right now. For sure in tournaments, you could leverage the Kyle Anderson ownership, which is at like 42% right now, and go take a shot on Nah, who's at 11%. 100% in tournaments, that is an interesting option. As far as high up, Anthony Edwards looks great, 48-point fantasy projection, 59%. He's in the optimal. He offers a great ceiling. He's pretty much on par with Luka as far as ceiling goes, I think, in this series. At least he's capable of doing that. I would imagine in game 2 at home, he's going to pop off. I mean, the guy put up 51 fantasy points while only scoring 19 points in game 1. So I think he's going to show up as a scorer. He's been really hit or miss lately, pretty inefficient. 3 of his last 4 games, he has under 20 points scored. So eventually that is going to turn back around. I think it happens tonight. So really like him in the captain. The only thing is right after Luka, he's probably going to be the second most owned captain guy. So you can definitely try other things as well. But after Luka, he's the guy I'm looking at the most as far as high-end captain spends. Then you have Cat. Obviously, he's going to carry ownership at 56%, and Rudy is going to carry ownership at 59%. I continue to prefer Rudy just because he's cheaper. And obviously, he has a clear path to a double-double. He can get blocks and easy buckets, so he's $1,000 cheaper. So I like him. I think both guys are viable in the captain slot, but I'm just going to prefer Rudy. They're basically the same play. Cat has a little bit of a higher ceiling if he's hitting his threes, but I think Rudy has a much better floor. Mike Conley just continues to be there at 7K on a showdown slate. I'm not looking for him to be in my captain slot because he doesn't have the upside I want. But if he's your last guy in at utility, I think that's fine. He's safer than Jaden McDaniels, and he's $1,000 more. So if you're stuck there in no man's land and you're just looking at Conley and McDaniels, I think Conley looks like a good play. Okay, that really does it for me. Like I said, my main strategy personally, if I'm doing one lineup, I'm probably targeting a Minnesota guy in the captain slot and targeting Minnesota heavy in general. But I don't want to get away from the attractive Mavs guys, specifically Luka, just to get different. You never want to get different just for the sake of getting different. You want to make sure everything you do has a little bit of logic and reason behind it, whether it be projections or ownership or matchup. Something has to be there to tell you to do something that the rest of the field isn't doing. Give yourself a reason for the why. So why am I going to target Minnesota more than Dallas? Because I don't believe they're going to go down 2-0 at home. And I believe they're better than they showed. And some of these guys, I think, are just due for explosive game, like Edwards in particular. And then as far as going a little bit more contrarian, I mean, somebody like PJ Washington that I mentioned, and perhaps still Kyrie Irving, these are 2 guys that can definitely pop off and get some usage. And they probably will not be as owned as they could or should be. specifically Kyrie, the captain, and specifically PJ in general. All right, that is going to do it for me. Hopefully it's helped you out a little bit. If it did, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. And by the way, you can also check out this DFS Hero lineup optimizer. You can get 15% off if you hit our link in the video description below. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.